Yeah, instead of Steve, please like and subscribe. Please click on the Deck Yours icon. Click on subscribe. It's 100% free. Well, you know, blood in, blood out. Anyway, this is a video on the Southport stabbings of a few weeks ago. An awful incident where 3 young girls, I think about 7 and 8, were murdered basically by a man who I believe to have mental health problems. From that, there were riots in the streets and there was a lot of misinformation. So I've done a separate part, a part 2 to this video, but I wanted to give it a prelude. I wanted to give it a little bit more information, a little bit more kind of foundation about the misinformation which kind of triggered those riots. There's a gentleman of a different channel who was furthered, I think maybe in sort of inaccuracy, the misinformation. And I just want you to, I'm going to start the video at important points just to check what was known and where things got to. And just to summarize, what was known is that the attacker, the murderer, was 17 years old and he was from Cardiff. That was it. And what was spread by far right groups, and what was spread by an influencer known as Andrew Tate, and that will be spoke about in part 2 of the video as well, all led to a conclusion. So as I say, just please focus on what was known, 17 years old, from Cardiff, and what the debate and what the focus of the second part was, and what the angst was all about, which was, I think they mentioned migration, untapped migration, and islamophobia, all these bullshit things had nothing to do with anything. It was just a political agenda. And I say this misinformation thing has to stop, and somebody has to kind of be a light or a beacon. I'm not saying it has to be me, but please check your sources. Remember during lockdown where everybody was indoors and everybody got their, a lot of people got their information off the internet. That is partly what's led us to this, I believe. So even for me, I'm not saying that you got to believe me in everything. What I'm really trying to say is that we need to verify what we can from independent sources, not somebody else who's sitting in their flaming bedroom somewhere. And not from sources you know to be politically biased one way or another. And I don't want to hear that all sources are biased. But there are some that, even if that is true, some are more biased than others. And we know which ones they are. We know where their bias is. And if you're living in a vacuum, then you are liable to be misled, especially from channels or sources which are historically mislead people. And especially if it makes no flaming logical sense, if you have to jump through 1,000 hoops in order to get through something which seems simple on the face of it. Let's go.
All the police made by the attacker was that he was 17 years old and from Cardiff. Now that's for legal reasons. Children can't be named. But it's not much information, and that's when misinformation floods the zone. The online speculation started pretty immediately on July the 29th, specifically anti-immigrant sentiment. You can see it here in terms of engagements on X, formerly known as Twitter. There's this big rise, and it continues for a long while. One X account drove that conversation in particular. It generally deals in anti-immigrant sentiment, and it did so in this.
It's an X account that is generally associated with anti-immigrant sentiment, and guess what it's called? The European invasion.
This case in the afternoon of saying the attacker was alleged to be a Muslim immigrant. We know that is not the case. Now, this account is followed by Andrew Tate. Here he is, the controversial influencer, and later Tate posts this, calling the attacker an illegal migrant.
This will be important later because he's brought up by a guest who was invited onto a very hostile TV show. That's the show that we're going to be analysing. And it's a show which has been reposted and commented upon by another influencer, the one that will become clear a little bit later. Andrew Tate is specifically saying an illegal migrant, which is incorrect, which is incorrect, stabs 6 little girls. Basically doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, but he's retweeting facts, and that's why you have to verify information before we go on.
Again, completely incorrectly. And then there's this. It's a much more specific piece of misinformation. It gives a name which we don't think corresponds to anyone we've come across, and it takes on its own life. Again, it spreads and spread, not as much as the general anti-immigrant speculation. You can see here the name in orange compared to the yellow general anti-immigrant sentiment, but it solidifies that narrative that this is to do with immigration and Islam. Now, that was initially posted on X in a deleted post now, but it was popularized by this account, a website called Channel 3 Now. They picked it up. And they appear to produce clickbait articles to drive advertising revenue, and this one really took off. Now, they subsequently posted to apologize for the, quote, misleading information, saying they deeply regret any confusion or, in their words, inconvenience.
You know what? I do respect their process if they get things wrong in order to apologize, but more so than that, I think there should be penalties, and there should be some minimal standards to do some basic level of journalism to make sure that facts are facts and that you're not doing something that will result in a riot. Just some kind of general journalistic integrity and minimal standards would be awesome.
They may have caused. So we have this wild, rabble-rousing, anti-migrant, anti-Islam atmosphere online, and now it collides with another separate but linked movement. This is the first poster we found calling for a protest, posted again on the day of the attack. It was created on TikTok and spread onto Telegram. Now, Telegram is a platform where the network of the far right tends to organize in different clusters. This poster was included in one group that featured explicitly Nazi imagery.
And again, this is the imagery, of course, of the far right, but in the next part, in part 2, all of this is kind of conveniently overlooked. It's kind of acknowledged and then forgotten, then excused for, it's acknowledged for about 1% of the time and then excused for 99% very vigorously, and it's it's going to be impossible to miss the inconsistencies there.
There were other calls to arms like this, apparently posted by another account on Telegram on Tuesday morning by someone involved with the far-right organisation, Patriotic Alternative. And then they proliferate, all centering around the same message, this call to arms. They're posted by small accounts on Telegram, and they get boosted back on X, increasing the reach of the message. It is those two worlds that drive this. Online misinformation, for whatever reason, being seized on by a more organised online right. And that is fed back into the wider X ecosystem. The result on the streets is chaos and violence.
So that's it. So as a final summary before we go into the next part, and please watch it again if we missed anything, because I don't want it to come from my words, but the only thing that we knew, 17 years old, born in Cardiff. That's the only information released by the police, because he was of a given age, because he was 17, he was underage. And the people stoking up all the information were far-right groups, which included actual active Nazis. Basically, peeps and opinions associated with the far right. I will elaborate on this in the next part. And please don't forget the role of influencers, especially very key powerful influencers with large followings that were retweeting things without knowing any facts. So please remember to check your facts independently with reliable sources. See you in the next part. And I apologise for the lighting here. I've tried my best. It's quite late in the night in London, and this is the best light that I've got. This is all that we have. This is more of a political type video. It's going to go into a little bit about Brexit, about the London riots a couple of weeks ago. And as you know, I live in London. I'm born in the UK. I would say that the video touches on kind of scapegoating of migrants and just the whole kind of misinformation along those lines, of which I have a master's degree in economics, and I've also got a 2-1 degree in psychology, which may well come useful in this video. We will see. The things I want you to look out for is just look at the thread and the structure of arguments. I'm not going to say too much more than look at the thread and the structure of arguments. Look at, if you look in history, a lot of atrocities were made by making somebody the scapegoat, number one, and also by othering people into a homogenous group. That's number two, and making that homogenous group the cause of all problems, or cause of problems which any rational person would say, well, actually, if they are responsible for that. And bearing in mind again that they are being grouped into that doesn't even make it reality. It's not based on any facts, just assertions. But the logical flow would be that if they are what this person says they are, based on nothing, then yeah, it flows that you follow this thread of argument, and this is how people get kind of indoctrinated. It is very worrying. Let's see how this goes. And I will be jumping in as and when. There's going to be quite a lot to jump in on. This gentleman in the bottom right hand corner, I've seen him do quite a few videos. He actually inspired me to do this line of videos. Not only him, but you know, to an extent, he was very influential. And he always felt that there were certain things that he wanted to say and that he was holding back on. Let's see how much he holds back in this video. We shall go forwards.
Welcome back, tribe. I have one here talking about the riots going on in the UK, but it's extremely interesting because she invites this man on the panel, and he's basically simp ally McGee here, 100% no testosterone. I just want you guys to pay attention to the
I want you to pay attention to this first before we go on. Simp ally, was it 33 or whatever? I think he is from, was it Hungary, and he's actually based in California. I am born in the UK. I'm born in England, and I live in London. We talk about the London riots. I was directly affected by the London riots. Let's see what he's got to say. And again, let's look at the rationality and the facts put forward for these points of view from the host, from both hosts, aka the one on the left and the one on the right.
Alley of the men that are helping usher in the destruction of Western society. Because you have a woman arguing for the male point of view, the sensible point of view of unchecked migration and what it's doing to the community.
Did he just say, okay, well, I'm interested about this. He mentioned about unchecked migration. Nobody's in favour of unchecked migration. And there's going to be kind of, misunderstandings about that. But he said the destruction of Western... Let's see what he said again, because I don't want us to miss this thing.
Alley of the men that are helping usher in the destruction of Western society. Because you have a woman...
helping to usher in the destruction of Western society. Again, it's like this one emotive issue. You got to think about this straw man argument, how it's built. And this is where it starts. The destruction of the civilization that you are in if you're based in the West. I wonder what he's going to use to justify that. And he's already mentioned something about untapped migration. He's not even living in the UK. I'm living in the UK. No country in the world wants unfettered migration. I'm aware that we used to be part of the EU Customs Union. That never allowed people just to be economic migrants, which basically means you go to another country in order to claim benefits. But you can, or you could, travel as a worker, aka you're going to contribute to that economy, which by definition is of benefit. You can't travel there just for the prospect, not within the first 3 months anyway, of getting work. And beyond that, if you have never worked, you would never be eligible for anything at all. Not housing, not benefits. And he's going to touch on that a little bit later. But of course, he may well be an expert, but maybe not.
Arguing for the male point of view, the sensible point of view of unchecked migration and what it's doing to the communities, safety, all of this stuff. And then you have this guy, just listen.
About what migration is doing to the community's safety. There's that straw man, definition of straw man. If it wasn't a straw man, who's doing what to the communities? This is boogeyman of migration. Boogeyman of migration, oh dear. Where the facts is just an assertion. But it's that assertion which is put on the line, and he's got a lot of influence from his followers. Hopefully objective followers who say, I don't know, where's the facts to back that up? What would the facts be? Okay, has he been looking at the crime statistics in the UK, looking about who does what crime, basically, and what their origins are? He doesn't quote any sources whatsoever because he's just making it up and guesstimating at best. More worryingly, if he's not guesstimating, he's got a political objective. It's got to be one or the other.
Let it play out and then talk about it throughout the video.
The reason I say I think the governments are frankly dangerous is because we have a situation that is clearly mushrooming out of control. It's not being quelled. And when Sakir's stomach...
It's unbelievable, but somehow he's going to reference Andrew Tate. This guy. There's always a look. Always, man. They look a certain way. Just watch. It's just never failed.
Turned around first time and said, far-right thugs. A load of people online, to me, demonstrably looked like quite ordinary people. Started posting their photos and doing hashtag...
This is where that kind of straw man starts again, and look at the energy of this presenter. Is it professional? He hasn't even said one word yet. You've got to bear in mind. Remember, the guest, the interviewee, let's just say guest, he hasn't said one word, and she's already got a position that she's taken on this, that these people are the rioters, by the way. These people are everyday people. Let's see what else, according to her, let's see what else she's got to say.
I'm a far-right thug and so on and so forth. And as Tim and I were discussing earlier, when you talk about far-right as a political concept, they're normally people with matching shirts and a manifesto. When this started as people with ordinary concerns. Now, after the backlash against using that language, he then went on to do the same again. And to me, and I want your opinion.
Hold on, it said matching shirts and a manifesto. I think, and this is the Plymouth riot. So there was 3 girls murdered, right? Not in Plymouth. 3 girls murdered. One of those girls was of colour, and the others were not of colour. I'm not an expert on that whole situation. I believe the person who murdered those girls had mental health issues, and there was misinformation based on somebody retweeting something which was based on a fallacy, which led to the riots. Then these vigilantes, these right-wing people who were drawn in by what was said online, and the whole kind of right-wing movement went to the hotel and were threatening to burn the whole place down. This is a hotel that the Home Office had used to temporarily house people that they have a duty to house.
On this, to me, in doing so, what he did was further anger and alienate people, using, a crisis in this country as an excuse to carry out the most awful violence and thuggery and behaviour that defiles our flag, frankly. These people need to be locked up. They're monstrous. But it also, I think, has excused really appalling behaviour on the other side, who now seem to be justified in righteous indignation. We're talking about Muslim community.
You see how they always set these things up as well? It's like, yeah, and they shouldn't do it. They shouldn't do it. And I'm about to tell you all the justification of why they should do it. They should do it. And she's already thrown these Muslim kind of words out there, these catchwords. She's not really talking to this guest, this interviewee. She's not really talking to. She's preaching to the people who are watching, because there's a political objective here to demonise Muslims, basically, Islamophobia, at its worst. We will see.
As young men from those communities who feel disaffected, who are picking up in some instances weapons and forming mobs. So actually, far from making the situation go away and calming it down,
Listen, I don't want to keep stopping it. There's a group of rioters, as I've said. This is the facts. There's a group of rioters outside of the hotel who were threatening to burn it down, and there were 3 collections of right-wing people saying that all their minorities had to get out. She qualified that in the first 2 minutes and then ignored it straight afterwards. But the people who may well be defending themselves, aka the people the mob are trying to get, if you happen to be in the same area as them at the same time, even though we've all got a right to be here, we've all got a right to be here within the law, then it's the people who are the victims who are the problem here, who they have scapegoated and scapegoated to be the Muslims, the entirety of Muslims. And who is a Muslim anyway? Who looks like a Muslim? How do you identify one, even if you wanted to? I guess that would be the brown people.
would suggest that he's thrown an accelerant onto the fire. Do you think he's handling this well?
I think he's handling it fine. I'm very, very, very confused by the concern in some quarters of the media, including yourself, about the terminology far right. Why do you have an issue with that being applied?
Well, okay, fine. Okay, let's do this, actually. Let's do this. Tell me, what is far right, and especially related to what is going on here? Explain far right. Give me the definition, please.
It's quite self-explanatory, but it's far to the right of the political axis.
Well, explain it. You say it's self-explanatory. Yeah. That's tautological. That's like saying two twins. What is it? Well, explain it, list it, identify it, give it a shape, give it a texture, so we all understand what you mean when you're using those words.
So it's a political ideology, obviously, and it's big.
Gosh, man, the hostility. What has this guest done? He's hardly said any words. The hostile. What is it? What is the texture? What is this? What is it? Why don't you just ask him the question and then shut up so he can answer? How's about that?
Whose political ideology, and like the far left, there'll be many different elements of it, and there's many different kind of variants of far left. There's people who will agree with each other, disagree with each other on the far right.
Do you think these people looking in windows and acting like hooligans have a political ideology?
Some of them, of course they do. The EDL is a political organisation.
You do see them making
Oh my gosh. I think she was trying to say just because they are kicking in things that they haven't got an ideology behind them. How's about kicking in the things of, get the Muslims out and get the migrants out? Migrants being anybody of colour to these people. They're on the far right. If you don't believe that or you don't understand, please look at history. Let's just go back a little bit. This man here makes a good point.
Kicking in windows and acting like hooligans have a political ideology.
Some of them, of course they do. The EDL is a political organisation.
Some of them, Alex, do see them making Nazi salutes. Some of them actually have swastikas tattooed onto their bodies.
I get that.
Yeah.
But when people were saying online, does this now make me far right as well?
Yes, it does. But Alex.
No.
The problem
When
is,
ordinary men and women were putting their pictures up on Twitter, who frankly just looked like, Bob and Jane next door, and people who served in the army and former police officers, and people of all colours and creeds saying, I am now the far right side. Were they?
We need to.
But you see, look at what they did.
Look at the stupidity of this. Okay, just think this through. So you got people who are trying to target people based on the perception that they are migrants or the reality that they are migrants. And if they are migrants, they are here legally, and they've gone there as a mob trying to burn down this hotel and obviously just unsettle them if they encountered by this massive mob of men, people at the far right with the swastikas. And she more or less say, well, what's the problem? And if there's some people that look like they're everydayers, in her point of view from what she's just said, and I will rewind so we can just catch it and just make sure that I've got it absolutely right, because I know I have, then they are the normal everyday people. So how can they be looking like everyday people and be part of the far right? It's because that is a very simple thing, and it doesn't really require a logical leap. You just need to open your eyes.
The army and former police officers and people of all colours and creeds saying, I am now the far right side. Were they?
We need to.
But you see, look at what they did, because you could turn this back on them. Because there were some people with swastikas, shaved heads, neo-Nazis in the group, everybody is now guilty of said thing. Even Bob and Jane that go to protest, 3 little girls being stabbed, numerous others being critically wounded, they are now part of the same group. If you turn around that liberal logic and say one community commits crime more than other, they're all criminals. One community is broke, they're all broke. One community is smart, they're all smart. One dog bit you, that entire breed is dangerous. Do you see how they're lumping an entire group of people based on the actions of a few within said group? Now, isn't that the definition of bigotry that they tell us to stamp out and not to tolerate? Isn't it crazy?
We need to address
you could go further than that. That's exactly what they're doing about this perception of brown people as all immigrants and as all Muslims and as all criminals, from what you just said with your own mouth. You are absolutely right, but you don't have the vision, or you got the blinkers on, or you're pretending that you are not anti. I wish you'd just be upfront about it, but you are, but selectively within the same video. If you look around the room, to answer your question, if you look around the room and there are Nazis marching for the same thing as what you are, then you are on the... Not only should you kind of second guess yourself about where you're standing, because the Nazis aren't going to be left marching in the middle of politics by definition, and they're not going to be marching on the left either, but they will be marching, strangely enough, on the extreme right. If you have blinkers that what you're marching for is in keeping with people on who you may well not normally agree with, if you're honest, you may agree with them to yourself on the down low, but if you're being honest and say, I don't really want to agree with them, but you're looking around and you are marching with them, then you do. Simple as that.
bigger problem here, okay? And it makes people uncomfortable, and I'm sorry about that. But when people say, am I far right? Am I racist because I hold these views? Then if you do hold those views, then yes, you are.
Okay, what are these views? So where do we define this? Because when this began, right, there's definitely a hardened, vile core of people going out right now, mobile around the country, trashing our country, defiling our flag. That I agree with. But this started, actually, with a huge caucus of people concerned about uncontrolled immigration.
No,
is that a far right?
It didn't start with that, Alex. It didn't start with that. It started with lies and misinformation from people who seek division. You know, Andrew Tate.
This has got nothing to do with Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate did not suddenly get a lot of ordinary Brits upset about what is changing in their community.
He's trying to highlight a source of disinformation which has stoked up all tensions. That's what he's trying to do.
Because people, yes, he did, because people follow him on.
Do you see the soy cup? How do you bring Andrew Tate into a conversation which involves anti-immigration sentiment in the UK after the stabbing of 3 little girls while they were in dance class? We're having a conversation on unchecked migration, mass migration, people not assimilating in the society.
No, you are having a conversation about people not assimilating society. You're not even from the UK, let alone from London. You're not from the UK at all. You don't know what's going on. You're just making inferences and guessing. But then and that's okay. That's your will. Keep it to yourself, or just check those facts first.
That they're moving into, creating parallel societies and ghettos where integration is impossible and crime explodes, unemployment explodes, safety and the security of people all around them get threatened. And not only that, but the government is helping these people. They're giving them stipends, they're giving them monthly allowances, they're giving them housing, food stipends, they're giving them a bunch of help.
I work in housing. I work with the homeless. None of that is true. None of that is true. While somebody is an asylum seeker, at best they might get a hostel. We're talking about the bare bones. They might get the most rudimentary little bit of change to spend. Not a lot. I think something like 30 quid. Might be a little bit more, but it's not going to be much more than that. £30 a week or something like that. Really, if you think about cost of living, is nowhere near. And they may be in that situation for years, because there's a backlog and there's dragging their heels to process things, and that is well documented. Everything that he's saying is just either a fallacy, a lie, or just misinformation, or however you want to phrase it.
That far exceeds anything the native population would get from the government from just having a normal job, you know.
And that's another thing as well. It's this entitlement mindset that the people with a political motive are just putting out there as another lie. It's like, well, why are they getting that? Almost like they know what possessions they own and the source of those possessions and who was brought it. Well, obviously, there's no obviously about it. Just stay in your box. Stay in your box and mind your own business. Where has mind your own business gone these days? And people talking about things they've got absolutely no idea. I don't know how much money this guy's got. Probably quite a lot. But I don't pretend to know. You know what I mean? I don't pretend to know. How can you pretend to know about how many strangers you've never met and spoke to, what the source of their income is? And it's this entitlement mindset. Well, since you do know in your own mind that what somebody else owns and the origin of whatever they've got from what you can see, you feel like you must be at least more deserving. It's that kind of entitlement mindset, more so than just, you know what, I'm my own person. As long as what they're doing is legal and within the rules, that is fine. And if I've got a problem, guess what you got to do? You got to speak to the politicians and change those rules, because they are the legislators on our behalf. Or is this just kind of new news? Honestly, this kind of distorted vision of society and reality, and where this, I'm not talking about him, I want to be clear, I'm not talking about him, but where stupid people still have got the vote and a voice and the platform they easily led. It's just shocking.
Average everyday workers in average salary jobs to make ends meet are struggling to keep the lights on sometimes, struggling for electricity on these heat waves that Europe is going through, struggling for the bare necessities. But you can come here, throw your passport, ID, and documentation that you have with you over the ocean on your little boat, touch European shores, and then your life changes forever. You're now an asylum seeker. You're now a migrant. You could say you're from any country that you may visibly look remotely close to, and you'll be taken care of. You'll be housed. You'll be put in nice 5-star hotels. You'll be put in these upper scale homes.
You would know. Oh my gosh, man. You don't know what you're talking. You're just lying. Okay, if one person, I'm not saying that it is, because it's just crap. Can you think of the concept of whenever a local government would ever book a 5-star hotel, like ever, and if it did, would that be that less than half of 1% of the time? But if you're going to mention it like the way that he is, then it seems like it's much more. But it really just shows he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. And then putting in premium housing, what are you talking about? Later on, he goes to talk on about it's mostly single men, single angry men. He doesn't use the word angry, but that's the inference that he gives. In what world, if you know what you're talking about, definitely anywhere in the UK, would any local government go out their way to put any single male in some kind of luxury development? I mean, for what? If there is a duty to house somebody, they'll be housed just like anybody else and prioritised just like anybody else. But that would not be as an asylum seeker. That's when they actually have status in the UK, just like anybody else. Because they would just be entitled under law to be treated fairly. And that's what it's about, isn't it? Was it about something else? Please, stop the misinformation.
put in all these places where the average person will never get to live. And it's all funded by the taxpayer. While you're working, struggling, trying to put food on the table, your tax money the government is taking that directly affects your quality of life is now given directly to some dude, because it's mostly men, fighting age males. This isn't...
Okay. Again, if somebody follows the rules and follows the law and anything, and that includes asylum, because there's an asylum process, guess what the solution is if somebody's making an asylum application and you don't want them to be a burden on bureaucracy and resources? You invest in processing those applications quick. And anybody that's not legit, they go straight back. Or they can go about it like they have for years in the UK, if this man knew, and of course he does, he's never lived here, but of course, and that is do it very slow over many years. And where do they go over those years? They stay here, obviously, because it hasn't been processed. But part of the reason, I don't want to go into the reasons why possibly they are doing it very slow, but whilst they are being processed, as I said, they will be in their bare minimum accommodation, if anything at all, and they'll be on very, very little income with very little rights. Just putting it out there. Can't really think about why they would take a long time.
Some families, war-torn refugees, escaping with their little girl and their little boy on their shoulder. It's mostly men. They get to live a better life off your hardworking back. And now people are inflamed by that scenario and are sick and tired of seeing stabbings and what else.
He's getting confused now. So yeah, originally he was talking about asylum seekers, and now he's talking about refugees. If they've literally gone through the correct process, it is generally going to be fleeing a war-torn country, and it's not going to be, even that is not going to be an automatic yes. Okay, but even then, the most able people would more likely be expected to remain where they are because they're able-bodied. So it'd be the more kind of ill, which takes us down another rabbit hole. But you know, they are not well enough to survive in extreme conditions of an unsafe war-torn country, and they can make an application and be assessed in the law that we've agreed to, subject to the treaties that we've also agreed to internationally. And if we don't want to do that, the way to do it is, as you know, go to your MP and lobby like anything else.
This happen. It seems to be perpetrated by a certain group of people against another certain group of people, and you're being called racist because you notice. Simply noticing is racist. Simply speaking up, you're...
No, targeting a group, especially unfairly, and demonising them and making them straw man arguments about which are founded on absolutely no facts whatsoever and misinformation. That's a racist thing to do. For example, if, say if I had his reach and maybe a wider reach, something on the equivalent, something that goes out to more or less the whole nation, I said people that wear grey t-shirts and sunglasses indoors, they are not to be trusted and they're full of BS and they're just wasting our time. I have no kind of time. I'm just using it because he's putting everybody else in that position. I'm just flexing it. It's just, you know, reversing it just for lols. If I said something like that people like that don't know what they're talking about, and everybody just had a more negative opinion of him based on the facts, he might not appreciate that. That's why I would never do it.
Opinion is now racist. And if you have the same opinion as maybe one person in the group that may have a certain shaped tattoo denoting a certain party from 50, 60 years ago, however...
He's talking about Nazis. He's trying to. He can't bring himself to say that he may have something in common with the Nazis just because they're in the room, they're marching down the road, and they kind of cheering along the loudest with you. That's nothing to be a red flag about, is it? Is it?
It was, you are now just as extreme, just as far right, just as racist. Wild. And then the head of your state makes inflammatory remarks saying you're a far right thug. Bob and Jane.
Again, oh gosh, man. No, I don't really understand. I'm trying to process the point that he's making. So if you say that they are racist for sympathising, having things in common with just literally with the definition of far right, but also if there are other known far right figureheads such as Nazi people into what's it called now, Nazism, then you are probably also a racist.
Protesting the death of little girls and unchecked migration, spikes in crime, far right thug.
Online. He's the most searched man on the internet.
I worry that people like you. I worry that people like you have swallowed your own narrative to the extent that for some reason you cannot see the wood from the trees. You have spent so long gaslighting us that problems we see happening in our society.
Who is gaslighting? Oh my gosh, man. When you think about how many words she said in relation to the guest and how she's reacting, it's kind of, there's something unstable there, but it's either that she's just unstable or deliberate. You know what I mean? It's just that kind of emotive, beyond thinking. She's not really thinking, just reacting like blah blah. Yeah, it's awful. My friend in the middle, never go on this show again. Don't even tolerate it. Don't just kind of play this silly game that they want to play.
Society don't exist, and that they are our fault, and you're doing it again. You are repeating that language and that narrative. When are you going to go into listening mode and understand, actually, that discontent comes from something? It comes from Beard's material need. It comes from a lack of integration and social concerns. When you're going to understand that, and instead of just...
Comes from a lack of integration and social concerns. If you look at that thing in the middle, the lower middle, it says anti-migrant threat, plot to hit 39 immigration centres, services and LEG. I don't know the rest of it. The rule of law actually matters in this country. People selectively forget. As long as people obey the rule of law, there's not a problem. The problem is that they're not.
It sounds to me like you're making apologies for racism.
Of course I'm not. You idiot. Listen, I've told you there is violent things happening.
Why are you talking about...
Get him off. I don't want to listen. I do not want to speak to a man, frankly, who seems to have a pathological problem with the priests. Idiot. This is why we're not solving the problem, Tim, because you can't talk to them. You cannot explain to them that there are people in this country who are really upset with the way society is without him turning around and saying that somehow I am condoning or inciting the violence happening, which I'm absolutely not doing.
Crazy how they'll inject those narratives of, no, it's Andrew Tate's fault, and you're making excuses for the fascist and the racist. You're making man, take a second here to really think what that soy boy just said. 0 test in his bloodstream. He practically oozes estrogen. You can tell by his physiognomy. You are condoning fascism and racism because you don't agree with young girls being stabbed by the very people you are letting coming into your country who are making up a lion's share of...
Okay, listen, hear what he said about young women being stabbed. Yeah, the young girls being stabbed. One of those was of colour. Right? A third of them. Even if there wasn't, it wouldn't make any difference at all because nobody would support that happening. It's an atrocity. It's an atrocity. We'd work to stamp it out. Very recently, there was a nurse in a hospital that killed a lot of her patients. She happened to not be of colour. Nobody was writing about that. But they write about the incident with the person of colour. Can't see why. That's your problem, my friend, is the lack of consistency. And it's a political agenda, and we've seen through it.
The assault, robberies, murders, they are coming in the country unchecked and in numbers so great they fail to
Again, assault, robbery, murder. And he's just pinning it on. And because he says it, he feels like it's fact. And I guess in some way, for that to happen, because there aren't no facts there, he hasn't rooted it in any statistics whatsoever, so there's no reason to think that he has. He's read anything. And if anybody would know if it existed, it would be myself. For reasons I'm not going to discuss. He also goes on, I think he's about to say about people integrating once they immigrate into the UK, about them integrating into society. The thing about Western society and the thing about British culture is one man cannot force another to do anything. You can't force them to have a religion. You can't force them to be your mate. They just go about their day. And the truth is, if you take the time, and I'm sure you would be aware, most people have the core things in common anyway. They just want to be happy and left alone and unaffected. There you go. And if you focus on those things, honestly, your life would be happier. But I say, in law, nobody is forced to do anything at all. Just keep that in mind, please. And as long as people are within the law, nobody's got a problem. And the individuals that are that break the law of whatever colour, of course, you report those to the appropriate authorities, and you fund those authorities to do what they need to do and be able to do it.
The government has no plans that are actually effective in integrating these people. Their cultural values are not the same as European values. They create parallel societies because of all these differences and factors. And integration in...
Sorry to keep stopping it. Where he's given no foundation at all. And that's what they do again. They say nothing with any foundation. And then in your mind, once you've been indoctrinated, and this is part of indoctrination, is that you make it fit. He's given no facts to back up anything. But if he says it, and if you kind of go along with it, then you make it fit. Oh, he must mean. And in some ways, I've been drawn into it as well. But I just kind of, even with a little bit of consideration, is I can see that it's just full of bullshit.
Multiculturalism is failing right before their eyes. So then you're being gaslit and told that if you even speak up, mention where the person is from, mention what the perpetrators believe in, mention anything beyond the narrative, you are condoning fascism and far-right ideology. This is how they gaslight and label you an extremist in order to shut your conversation down, because the logic alone destroys their brains and they don't want to have their worldview crumble around them. So it's better to throw shit on the conversation and plug their ears, labeling you the crazy one, when they're actually engaging in the exact behavior that they're accusing you of in their.
I can't let it run too long because I've got to jump in there. This was all, the whole another stupid thing about it was, again, at least one of the three girls was of colour. I think she was an Indian girl. Okay, so people, the minorities that they're attacking were also victims. Okay, and it was also based on misinformation about him being some form of asylum seeker, when it turns out that he was. It was just all bullshit, and people just jumped on. But thankfully, what happened in the end, yes, they had their little right-wing protests. There's about 3 in London, and I think there's one in Birmingham, and there's one elsewhere. But the people also joined in to... Sorry, the everyday people that the presenter was mentioning before made their own protest to say these right-wing racists don't represent us. That was the proud moment of the UK in those riots.
Wondering why far right, stop using that fucking word. They're wondering why sensible, right-wing, more conservative parties are gaining traction in power and influence all around European countries. We're seeing what's happening to the once great Germany, to the once great UK, to the once great Nordic countries. Sweden used to be the safest places, the places everyone from around the world wanted to come to start a new life, integrate in the culture, and be proud to give their kids good living conditions and a head start in the world with some of the best colleges, mines, research, etc. All Western society had to offer. Now it's turned into all of this. Yes, I think people have a right to be upset.
Yeah, because you've lived in all these countries. You're from Hungary, now you're living in the States. So what the hell do you know about you? You just keep throwing these things out there, and I say you have to entertain it to an extent, but really shouldn't. It's just not based on anything. You've got no sources or anything. You're just guessing, but you're guessing things in line with this narrative and this political agenda. Sickening.
Someone said right here, it's simple. It's not about race. It's about mass migration. Starmer alienated half of the country in refusing to address people's anger, and instead only taking aim at the, woke far right. We need a leader who can speak to the whole country, calm tensions, and bring folks together. This clown isn't up to the job. He never answered the question. He doesn't know what a fascist is. Basically, the attitude of the establishment is that anyone who didn't vote Labor is far right. Similar problems here in the US, yeah? And everybody's saying the same thing. It's mass migration, not race. The government has no right to allow uncontrolled immigration in our country without the consent of British citizens. This is the problem with Labor. They hate indigenous people. The bloke is a heavy mouth breather, passing on his far left rhetoric. The guy is the problem with the country. He comes across as a college lecturer who thinks his students are all his friends. Just wanted you guys to see that men are ushering in this destruction. There were a lot of comments on the videos prior that women voted for this, women vote for that, but at the end of the day, the mechanism of enforcing every single legislation in any country, society as a whole, is men. Women can't simply vote for a policy. It takes the vote of men and implementation by men to make it the rule of law. So weak men are creating hard times, boys. Times are about to get really hard, and then we'll create strong men after, but that may be your children's generation, not ours. I don't know how far this is going to descend, how much more instability and...
Honestly, got no idea where this comes from. I have no idea where it comes from. I say I'm actually in this country, born of this country. Our most prosperous times were when we were part of the EU, and since we have left, we have fallen. That was about 4th or 5th richest in the world, and last time I checked, we were about 7th or 8th richest in the world. That's over about 8 years. And when people complain and they're moaning, they're feeling the pinch of income's not rising quick enough to keep up with inflation. All again, that wasn't a problem before, and other countries are coping better than us. But people are trying to find reason to justify the whole kind of reason for leaving the EU, and trying to find reason because of the scapegoaters about why they're not doing as well as what they think they should be doing. It's never a question of maybe working harder, which is the actual plan they voted for, was that they would have to work harder in order to overcome the less favourable conditions than what they were in before. We had tariff-free trade before. Now we have barriers, and now we need to find efficiencies to overcome that barrier. even though as soon as we do, they'll just increase the barrier, because that's what customs unions are there to do, to preserve the advantage for them. But that efficiency, if you look in the history of this country, has always been born predominantly by the labour force. No increase in wages and no job security. They've just gone back to type. And that's what people were voting for. They just didn't realise it, but they're living it every day until they do realise it.
Degradation needs to occur before change happens, but it's happening. We're living in it. It's getting worse and worse. It's spreading all around Europe, where they're accepting mass migration. And just living here in Bucharest and seeing just how calm and peaceful it looks in comparison, when you're seeing crazy stuff like that on the news, or just the disgusting nature of the streets and some of the West.
Apologies, I thought it was Hungary. I think Bucharest is in Romania. But I'm sure at some stage in a different video he said he was living in California, but maybe he was just bidding for a contract over there. This is an East European man who does not live, and he's not from the UK, but is trying to talk on these issues. And that's fine if he does his research, but he obviously has not. He's only got a political agenda.
Capitals where there's like homeless everywhere, trash everywhere, drug addicts, crimes, pickpockets, crazy stuff like this. And you're living in a place in Eastern Europe formerly that looked like a shithole is now like a utopia for some. I've done walking videos. They're on the second channel. You can see what it looks like around here. And even the worst parts of this country are better than some of the good parts of the ones that people are living in the West. I mean, it's absolutely maddening. And then you're not even factoring cost of living. You're paying so much money, paying into so many taxes, and you don't even have something you can remotely call a safe, stable society around you. That's insane. But you say any of this, you're far right. You are a fascist. All right.
Give it up.
Again, that's a straw man. It's like he's making all these things. What do you say now? How good Romania is or Bucharest is, but if you say it, then you're part of the far. Then you're part of the far right. The only person who said that is him. Then who else is saying it? Bizarre. I don't know who this gentleman is at the top, but he most definitely has. Those kind of dog whistles, he's kind of giving out there, but they're a little bit blatant. Of course, the language is going to be a little bit bizarre. You're going to talk about the barbarians, and at the moment you can only see Keir Starmer at the bottom, but he's going to talk about the barbarians leaving the gates open. The barbarians, I'm going to give you a clue. To the left of Keir Starmer is Sadiq Khan, our mayor of London. He's a Muslim. Okay. The barbarians are going to leave the country open to destruction. If you follow the thread of the insanity that this guy at the top is going to say, and I don't know who he is, but I would guess he's on the far right. And the fact that this video, that guy, the previous host, the one from the channel, the fact that he chose this video is very revealing about his true political motivations. Let's see and try and make some sense about what this guy's about to say. I'm going to slow it down a bit to the normal pace, just because we need to kind of try and process and understand what he's saying.
Give it to your deadliest enemy and pay for the rope that will choke you. This is very...
I don't want to miss it.
You say any of this, you're far right. You are a fascist. All right.
Give it up or give it to your deadliest enemy and pay for the rope that will choke you. This is very urgent business, ladies and gentlemen. I beseech you. Resist it while you still can, and before the right to complain is taken away from you, which will be the next thing. You will be told you can't complain because you're Islamophobic. The term is already being introduced into the culture as if it was an accusation of race hatred, for example, or bigotry.
You can't. Okay, so being under that barrier, I know you already understand. So if you are Islamophobic, then what's it say here? You may well be guilty. You're going to be accused of being, in favour of race hatred or bigotry. If he doesn't understand the definition of Islamophobia, but he's going to go further, where he gets into this crazy discussion of barbarians and leaving the gate open. I'm guessing he means Keir Starmer's going to leave the gate open, and then it pans to Sadiq Khan for Islamophobia and I guess brackets Sharia law. Crazy.
Whereas it's only the objection to the preachings of a very extreme and absolutist religion. Watch out for these symptoms. They are not just symptoms of surrender. Very often ecumenically offered to you by men of God in other robes, Christian and Jewish and smarmy ecumenical. These are the ones who will hold open the gates for the barbarians. The barbarians never take a city till someone holds the gates open for them. And it's your own preachers who will do it for you, and your own multicultural authorities who will do it for you. Resist it.
Multicultural authorities, that would be the Keir Starmer bit. But just think of the lunacy about what this guy's talking and the kind of fear mongering that he's trying to promote against people who are already kind of indoctrinated and not as I say, they're not rationalising. He's got nothing. What he's saying is based on any logic or any kind of facts. It's crazy talk about barbarians and just throwing out keywords of Islamophobia and but don't let them, if you're bigoted, don't let them kind of put you in that bigoted box.
While you can. And if you wonder what will happen if you don't, look and see how a cricket team in Middlesex in England had to change its name by force last week because it was called, and had been for years, the Middlesex Crusaders. Look and see how stories about little pigs can't be taught to children in English schools anymore, lest offence be taken by the religion of peace.
I must admit, man, wow, since he's given those two examples of the extreme horror that we all, even if it was true, about the horror that we're going to have to live under, if by some reason we've got to change the name of a cricket team, we can't have a story, which I think is bullshit anyway, and I think he's just lying about 3 pigs told to kids.
Resist it while you can.
One of the things that is coming up over and over again is Islamophobia. And, well, you can see the stats, you can see the numbers rising, particularly since October the 7th. Although we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking that before October the 7th, this was all heading in the right direction. It's been far too high for far too long. Clearly, we need to just say over and over again, Islamophobia is intolerable. It can never, ever be justified. And we have to continue with a zero tolerance approach. And I think there's more we can do in government. There's certainly stuff online, which I think needs tackling much more robustly than it is at the moment.
What I'm hoping, Keir, is your experience as a prosecutor means you'll be thinking about the strategy we can use to make sure we take action against those who break the law.
Let me know what you guys think and see you on the next one.
I've just discovered the most unique hotels.
Listen, I wish I could have spent more time just breaking down this kind of conditioning which is going out there, and people being conditioned by unverified sources and coming to random conclusions. I say random in the sense of logic, but conclusions that other people for political reasons want you to reach. And his doing this video is part of the same effort. But please just ask him to look at the facts. Look at what their sources are, because there are no sources. Maybe it's just because they can't be bothered to do the research, but I don't think it is that. I think there's a political motivation behind this, and it's whether they have to lie or not. They want to go for something in order to try and force it to happen, and I do fear it's some form of authoritarianism. We need a fight, and we just need to be aware. Please like, subscribe. That is Stephen. I'm out.